Around this time, I made a wonderful discovery, and the wonderful discovery was not only the woman who introduced me, but the First Congregational Church of Kent. I had not been a churchgoer. Yes, I would occasionally go to a church as a child, but I didn't come from a church-going family. They were a family who, oh, it's Easter, we'd better go, and oh, it's Christmas, we'd better go again. So I just, I didn't know about it. I was baptized as a baby. I was confirmed as a teenager in the Episcopalian Church, or Church of England as we call it over there. But I had never been part of a congregation. When I realized how afraid I was and how lonely, and that I had only recently moved to Kent, Connecticut, I then happened to hear through a friend of my son's that there was a woman minister at the First Congregational Church of Kent. I knew nothing about UCC, Congregational Church, didn't know a thing. But in my vulnerable state, I felt that a woman minister, I would feel safe there. And I went the first day, and I was kind of nervous. I was wearing, my hair hadn't yet dropped out, but it was about to. So I was wearing the wig so that in Sundays to come, people wouldn't say, oh, your hair changed. And it was a moment when I felt so lonely and so sad, and I felt like a visitor. And I walked into the First Congregational Church of Kent, and Melinda stood there at the pulpit and said, "This is the day the Lord has made." And I thought, oh, and I immediately started crying, and then we had wonderful organ music, some Bach, and then somebody who has since become a friend got up and said, please could we have prayers for 26 men and women of our husband's regiment who'd just been shipped off to the Far East, and all of that. And I suddenly thought, my little problem, like, okay, I'm missing a body part, but what is that compared to what so many people are going through? It was at that time that I felt that I had lost my innocence, the innocence that made me feel that cancer couldn't happen to me. How foolish of me to think that, but I think I'm not alone in, so many of us think it can't affect us. I then was still keeping it a secret, and I suddenly got a call from my agent saying the National Enquirer are going to out you. Now, nobody wants to be outed by the National Enquirer. You know what that's, I mean, I fess up, some of you read it, so do I, but we don't want to be, inquiring minds like to know, but inquiring minds don't want to be in it. And they said, we're going to run with this story that Miss Redgrave has had a mastectomy, that she's going through chemo and radiation, and I was terrified about employment as an actor, that people would go, oh, she won't be able to work. Now, I was already in a play in New York and performing every night and keeping it a secret. Then I thought, well, I want to bring this out in my own terms, because you know those Enquirer stories, it's always, you know, bravely battling through her tears as she struggles to stand. You know, no, that wouldn't do. So at the time it came out, and it was indeed a picture of me sort of gasping, and you know, who knows where they took it. And Larry King, Jane Pauley, and Barbara Walters all wanted me to go and be a guest. And I chose Larry King because I knew he wouldn't get soft with me. For any of you who have gone through cancer treatment, I think it's the drugs, but it's also the situation. You're awfully vulnerable and trembly, and somebody says to you, oh, you look nice today, you burst into tears. Somebody says, you know, let me get that door for you, you cry. I mean, so if anybody shows you any sympathy at all, you're just going to fall apart, and I couldn't fall apart on national television. I was afraid that Barbara Walters, who's a wonderful, wonderful woman, and Jane Pauley would get a little soft with me, you know. How is it to look in the mirror and find you have no breast? And I would start weeping, and I would hate myself, and so would everybody else, and then, you know, that's it. But with Larry, it was kind of, so they cut it off, and then, you know, I mean, that's, and you just rise to the occasion, you know? So Around this time too, my mother, my sister Vanessa, my brothers Corin, and my mother came with my sister Vanessa to America because Vanessa was going to be in a play in New York. My mother was then almost 93, and she came to live very near to my house in my niece's guest cottage. This was like the blessing of all time because I was going through treatment. Had she reached her final days, I would not have been able to go and visit her because I would have to go on with my treatment. I couldn't fly and all of those things. But there she was. I didn't tell her I had cancer because I knew she would immediately think that she was going to lose me, and I was the baby of the family. I am the baby of the family, her special angel, you know. So, and she would, I had this wonderful wig, quick plug for Raquel Welch's wigs. Anybody needs a good wig, go online, Raquel Welch, they're brilliant. You can get them in any style. And she would stroke my wig, and I by then had no hair, and say, "Your hair is so pretty." It was a privilege to be a part of her last days, and she passed away peacefully in my niece's guest cottage, just near to my house in the country, surrounded by family, by grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And all this time, I was attending the church, and I realized that I had never been part of anybody's death before. I'd never seen anybody dead until I saw my mother. I come from a background in England where death is a little bit pushed under the rug, and children don't go to funerals and things like that, or certainly not in my day. But it was such a privilege, and at this time, here I was, I turned 60, and I lost my hair the day before. I was in a play, I was going through breast cancer treatment, and my mother was dying. And people say, "Oh, that must have been the most terrible year of your life." And I say, no. In so many ways, this 2003 was one of the greatest years of my life. Because if I were given the choice, obviously I'm not going to be, that a magic wand could be waved, and I could go back to that age of innocence where I thought I was completely invulnerable to the idea of cancer or anything like that. What would I miss if I said, okay, I'll take that choice, and we'll roll back the time, and we'll pretend it didn't happen, and it didn't happen, and you won't meet the people I have met through both this combination of attending the First Congregational Church of Kent, of getting to know Melinda and her husband Bobby and her extraordinary daughters Bethany and Sarah, of the congregation there, of feeling part of it, but also the members of the club we didn't want to join, and I'm talking about cancer survivors. I've met so many remarkable people, and for the first time in my life, I think I was a rather controlling person who tried to control everything, and when you get cancer, you can't control it. And you realize, of course, none of us can control it. We can't control whether we live or die, but we can learn properly to live and have faith that, all right, you're in great hands here. And if time is short, well, at least live every moment so fully that when the day comes, either sooner or later, you don't feel you've wasted anything, that you've let go, you've seen the colors. And I mean, to begin with, for any of you out here, I'm sure there must be some cancer survivors among us here today, as well as myself. Isn't there a kind of euphoria of suddenly you look at the mountain covered with the fall leaves and you've never seen the colors that bright? And you let go and you say, I'm going through this journey.